Carolina. And she is passionate about empowering others to use their unique strengths and personality traits in the context of disability rights and advocacy. As someone who loves to learn things herself, Alie believes each person is on an individual journey of learning, self-realization, and growth. Alie thoroughly enjoys coming alongside others. I love that, Alie. Walking along, being along, coming along others as supportive, as a supporter and encourager. She especially enjoys showing others how disabilities can be an asset and a strength. Although Alie used to perceive her diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder as a limitation and a barrier in the past, she now believes that it has made her a fuller, brighter person with a thirst for knowledge and a passion for making things right. Alie has a bachelor's in secondary English education from Anderson University and a master's in social work from Walden University. Her experience working in the field of education in varying capacities has developed the professional strengths, knowledge, and passions that have bolstered her career in disability rights advocacy. Alie, it's an honor for us to have you here, and we're so excited to hear what your perspective and what you're bringing. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone. I'm very equally honored to be here. We were just talking before the presentation began, just me and Vicki, about how important this work is and how exciting it is for me and those in my organization to talk about this information. And even though a lot of what I will be talking about, of course, is from my perspective as a South Carolina resident, it applies to every state, no matter what stage of legislation, policy, any of those things that relate to supported decision-making, guardianship that your state is in. And we'll talk about that later on. But first of all, I wanted to give a description of myself. My pronouns are she and her. And I am a white woman. I'm wearing glasses. I need them now in order to see. Did not think that would be the case 10, 15 years ago. I have long brown hair. I'm wearing what you can't really see, but a maternity jumpsuit. And I am in my home, and you see a background of a fan on the ceiling and then some curtains behind me as well. I like to provide a visual description. It's part of how we make our presentations as accessible as possible. So again, feel free to ask your questions in the chat throughout the presentation. If there's anything that needs clarification in the moment, of course, Christine or Vicki, feel free to stop me and ask those questions. Otherwise, I'll answer all questions toward the end, and hopefully we can have a pretty lively discussion about some of the things we talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can I get confirmation that people can see this slideshow?
We can see it, Alie. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, this presentation is all about supported decision making. And if you've never heard that term before, that's okay. We will define that. We'll talk about that. But I'm certain that many of you, if not all of you, have heard some of these definitions before, most likely guardianship. But this presentation is all about supported decision-making and other alternatives to guardianship. We will talk about guardianship a little bit. And it's all about promoting the least restrictive measures, and we'll talk about that more as well. So again, my name is Alie Springgate. These are my pronouns, she and her. I am the Director of Advocacy at ABLE, South Carolina. And then you'll see my headshot pictured below. I look slightly different, probably a little thinner since I'm not pregnant in that picture. But I have lighter brown hair, kind of like a blonde tint to it. Still wearing the same glasses. And in this picture, I'm wearing like a salmon colored pink shirt with a black blazer over it. And I'm in front of a green background full of green foliage. Okay, so a little bit about Able, South Carolina. And every state should have the equivalent of an Able, South Carolina. We are a Center for Independent Living, which means we are a nonprofit. We're underneath kind of an umbrella organization, a national group of centers for independent living. And these organizations should be, and I say should be because sometimes it's not always the case. We got to do a little advocacy, but they should be disability-led organizations that are making transformational changes within systems, community, local situations, as well as individuals. So in our organization, we provide a lot of services, really anything that you can think of that has to do with disability, we have our hands in it. So a lot of direct consumer work. We have youth programs that are really robust, and we're very proud of those youth programs. We have fee-for-service trainings for businesses, other organizations. We also do a lot of systems advocacy, so a lot of policy work, and pushing legislation. So we work on all levels of our state and even nationally as well. We've been nationally recognized. We just celebrated our 30-year birthday. So we've been here for a while. And one of the things, I'm not going to read this whole slide. I will share our website at the end so that you can go and take a look at who we are and what our makeup is and who works with us. But one of the coolest things about this organization is that the majority of our staff are disabled folks. And we really believe that's so important for a disability-led organization, for most organizations, really, because we live this. This is our experience. We are able to offer so much lived experience and peer-to-peer support because we are disabled as well. I myself am a part of the disability community, and many of my coworkers are disabled as well. Actually, I think the number that we're up to is around 90%. I believe that's our percentage of folks, excuse me, who are disabled. So very briefly, our mission, I'm going to move this screen here. Our mission and values really focus on co-equality, disability justice, representation, and what it means to be truly inclusive through independent living. We operate from an independent living philosophy, which means that it can be confusing for folks because people think, are you saying that everyone needs to live by themselves independently? And rather, independent living is more about self-direction. You're in the driver's seat of your own life, and you have the ability and the right to gather the support that you want around you, whether that's a community service, friends and family, and you have the right to make decisions for your life. And for everyone, that looks a little bit different. Everyone's needs are different, but at the core, everything we do enforces and aligns with that independent living philosophy. And at the very bottom, it says, our work does not end when we leave this office. Disability is a part of who we are. We live this every day. And it's part of what is so exciting about working for a Center for Independent Living like Able. I'm going to briefly go through some of these mission statements. Our mission is to equip folks with disabilities with tools to foster pride and to direct their own lives. We want to educate the community, to challenge stereotypes, eliminate barriers, and we want to advocate for access, equity, and inclusion at every level, the individual, local, state, and national levels. And you'll see on the right-hand side a photo of every one of our staff at the time at our yearly advocacy day that we hold at the Capitol of in South Carolina. And we typically gather around the steps with our advocacy day t-shirts. And that year, the t-shirts were a light blue and featured some red writing on the front, but you'll see a variety of folks in wheelchairs gathered around the front, folks with varying disabilities, both apparent and not apparent, all cheering, some of people raising their arms, very happy, very excited, but most importantly, we're all together. So here are the goals for today's presentation. I want us to learn about guardianship, some of the misconceptions, some of the risks of guardianship, as well as alternatives to guardianship. I want us to learn about supported decision-making, and I want to share some resources with you that have been developed by Able South Carolina and collaborating partners over the years. So one of those being our Stop, Look, and Listen tool, and I'll get into that further on. And then I want to talk about ways that in South Carolina, we are advancing supported decision-making, what we're currently doing, but ways also, maybe some takeaways that you can take for your own state and ways to collaborate with folks in your own state that are very similar state to state. Because like I said, Centers for Independent Living are in every state, protection and advocacy groups, otherwise known as disability rights groups, are in every state. So we'll talk about that later. I do want to make mention that that we might talk about some things to do with the legal side of the world, but I'm not an attorney. We don't house attorneys at Able South Carolina. We do collaborate a lot with our protection and advocacy group in South Carolina. But I'm not giving legal advice, and I don't want it to be taken as legal advice, but we can certainly help point folks in the direction of legal counsel should anyone have any questions related to that. So some things I want us to be thinking about throughout this presentation, more rhetorically than anything. But first of all, how many of you can say that you made wonderful, sound decisions at 18 years old? And I know for me, I cannot say that confidently. I think that even though I'm an oldest child and an oldest daughter, which I think in a lot of ways can impact how you grow up thinking about the world. I felt like I had a good head on my shoulders and was making some good decisions, but when I was an 18-year-old, I thought like an 18-year-old and I acted like an 18-year-old. And sometimes I cringe thinking about that. And maybe several of you inwardly cringe at all and as well, and that's okay. But I want us to be thinking about the decisions we made when we were freshly adults. And something else I want us to be thinking about as well is especially if you are a part of the disability community, this is something that is probably something that you've thought of over the years. But when we make mistakes, when people in the disability community make mistakes, why are we held to a different standard? And that's certainly a question that really drives a lot of this content, is that for so long, members of disability communities have been held to this different standard in youth than other folks of their age, of their demographic. Namely, folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but all members across disability communities. And I myself have been able to look back and see some evidence of that, of being held to a different standard and being expected to put forth a different type of energy and intention, perhaps, than most people, to mask probably more frequently than others were asked to compensate for some undiagnosed things that I was dealing with at the time. So just some things to think about as we move through this presentation. I want us to go over some common age of majority scenarios before we jump into the topic of guardianship. When I talk with parents and families, and that's really the majority of my role when it comes to supported decision-making, is speaking with family members who are supporting loved ones, and then individuals who are considering options both in transition from youth to adulthood, but also who are considering either removing a guardianship or trying to push back on family members who are trying to enforce a guardianship or initiate a guardianship, or just trying to think about how to navigate moving through older age. Lots of different contexts, anywhere way you can think of. I speak with individuals who are addressing the topic of guardianship in their lives. So there are things that are typically not understood primarily by family members, that there are less restrictive alternatives to guardianship. Exactly what the full breadth of guardianship entails, what is it? What do I do once it happens? What do I do if I want to get rid of it? And then how to channel their concern into proactive skill building. And one of the things that we'll talk about is that a lot of the majority of reasons that I see people wanting to move forward with guardianship have to do with wanting to protect and wanting to care for. Good intentions, but just not understanding all of the risks associated with guardianship. And so what I will help do and talk to folks about is how to channel all of that desire for protection and desire for support into skill building, as opposed to let's put this piece of paper together and make all the decisions for this person. So moving forward, let's talk about guardianship. So some key definitions here. Guardianship can also be referred to as a conservatorship. There are some slight differences, but generally those two terms are used together. But guardianship is a judicial process for taking partial or complete control of a senior's or disabled person's decision-making, real property, and personal property. You may see the term alleged incapacitated person or confirmed incapacitated person. And this refers to a person with a disability, including older adults and young adults, who is voluntarily or involuntarily being placed under guardianship at the request of a petitioner. And that can be just about anybody can petition for guardianship, depending on family support, individuals, context for support. There are levels of guardianship. So a plenary guardianship, which is also known as a full guardianship, is where someone has complete control of a person with a disability's decisions, property, finances, and person. All of their rights are stripped away, all human rights, the right to marry, the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. A limited guardianship is narrower than a plenary guardianship. A limited guardianship only grants power to make decisions for a person with a disability in certain areas. And then those are terms specified by the court. So we've seen guardianships where someone may not have the right to vote, but they can marry who they want, or they do have the right to live independently, live in a community, but they can't leave the state. Or even leave the county in some cases. So a limited guardianship is where not all rights are stripped away, but still out of the list of potential rights that could be stripped away, many of them are. Supported decision-making is a less restrictive alternative to guardianships that helps the person with a disability live independently in integrated community settings with the support, services, and programs they need to live in the community. So again, living independently does not mean you're on an island, living by yourself, no support, and that's not even the goal. The goal is not for people to be operating without any help. I don't do that. No one I know does that. And certainly that should not be the goal for anyone that we're coming alongside and providing support to. Living independently, again, means that person's in the driver's seat of their life, calling the shots, making ultimate decisions with support, as much support as they would like and as they need. Very briefly, I just want to give you a list of organizations that have statements and have put out statements opposing guardianships. And so reading these on your screen, they include the National Council for Independent Living, which is our umbrella organization for Centers for Independent Living. Association for Programs for Rural Independent Living, the American Bar Association. We actually pull a lot of resources and use a lot of resources from the ABA there. The National Council on Disability, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, disability-led organizations such as Centers for Independent Living, and then Center for American Progress and the Family Law Self-Help Center, and many more that you all may be aware of or may not be aware of in your own states. So many organizations nationally oppose guardianship and propose beginning with least restrictive measures. So a little bit of history. Since the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act from 1990, institutionalization has decreased. We have seen a decrease in numbers since then of folks being confined, hidden away in segregated settings and facilities. Unemployment has also decreased. Now, we still have a lot of work there, but numbers to do with unemployment have decreased since the onset of the ADA. Segregated classrooms have even decreased. Again, still need for a lot of work with each of these goals. The ADA, while an enormously huge win for the disabled community, is still very much in need of advocacy, of push for better accountability across the board for folks to be following the ADA. So again, lots of work there, definitely not dismissing that, but these things have been progressing over the past 34 years. However, the number of folks under guardianship have more than tripled since the signing of the ADA. And why is that the case? Well, we have discovered, and there's been evidence and studies to support this, that guardianships are often referred to by professionals in various communities, but also just in general. It's just the most well-known. It's the most recognized option. It's the easiest go-to answer. Actually, we just had a case the other day where a mom was told that because her daughter had been diagnosed, her 19-year-old daughter had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and general psychosis, I think was what mom had mentioned. A lawyer in our state had told her, you have to have guardianship. She is not, she would not be considered competent, able to sign a healthcare power of attorney, which is what mom wanted. And that's so far from the truth and not at all what our law states and not at all what that's not true. So it's mainly due to misinformation why guardianships are so common, which is why we seek to educate as much as we can. But it is just the most well-known and recognized option. So a lot of people tend to defer to that. Guardianships often provide that sense of comfort for parents' fears about worst case scenarios. What happens if my child gets into a relationship that I don't agree with, and that person wants to take them away from me across the state? They're vulnerable. They can't make decisions. I'm worried that I won't have any control. I hear that from a lot of parents. Valid concerns, valid things to be afraid for, but the answer is not control. There are other answers. Guardianships are often misrepresented as a fix-all solution to complex problems. And I tell parents over and over again, at the end of the day, a guardianship is only a piece of paper, a very expensive piece of paper. And guardianships are not going to solve the problems that you think they'll solve. And what we really need to focus on is gathering support around the person to offer needed education, needed skill building. Many times, the young adults, primarily the young adults that I see whose parents are wanting to push guardianship, are young adults that have not been exposed to areas of practice where they can start building these skills and start learning these needed part of development, these needed things about the world, whether it has to do with education or relationships, how to start a job, how to be successful in a job. And we'll even get into some of the trickier, more complex cases as well. I'm kind of just talking in general across the board. But even still, guardianships are often referred to as like this fix-all solution when that's just not the case. And then some common sources for recommending guardianship. We see this a lot in the education communities, especially in special ed sectors, doctors and attorneys, and other parents as well. So across the spectrum of professionalism and disabled advocates, we'll see people who don't understand the full breadth of guardianship, folks recommending that. So there's, just to go over some common misconceptions, some confusion about guardianship. Folks often think that a parent is a guardian to folks older than 18 if they provide shelter and care to a person with a disability. And that's not true. A guardian is a term given by the court. So documentation is needed to verify guardianship. And you are, of course, in your right as a professional to ask for that documentation. Just taking someone's word that they are the guardian or they are the agent, the power of attorney, whatever the case may be, there does need to be documentation to prove that for folks that are older than 18. Once a person with a disability turns 18, a guardianship has to be in place for a parent to be able to support them with decision making. And we see that so much from professionals who have said essentially this verbatim, and that's not true. In every context, healthcare, education, finances, and so on, there are less restrictive options that can be considered before guardianship. Guardianship should be the last resort. And in South Carolina law, supported decision-making is not legally recognized in the sense that there's a template, an agreement that's widely used across the board. What our law actually states right now, and this is something that is a goal for us to put this in law later on down the road. But what our law actually says is professionals must educate parents, families on less restrictive alternatives before suggesting guardianship. So as you can probably guess, there's really not a lot of accountability over that. No one's overseeing that to make sure that that law is followed. So it really depends on organizations like ours to be educating and making sure that folks remember and know that, hey, this is what the law states, and folks need to start with less restrictive before moving on to most restrictive. But different states are different. Some states legally recognize supported decision-making, and that's the known law. And then some states have nothing. And so there's some good resources online if you're not sure what your state says as far as supported decision-making goes, and guardianship as well. That will tell you from state to state what the rules are. So here are some of the risks of guardianship. And this is pulled from various research studies that have been done over the years, particularly over the past 10 to 15 years. But once a court declares a person incapacitated, unable to make decisions, it's nearly impossible to reverse. And a lot of this is just, it would make sense. If I prove and have doctors write letters and prove that my child is unable to make decisions because of reasons X, Y, and Z, to then turn around and go, actually, they're now able to make decisions. It's a significant feat to have to prove that. I encourage everyone to look up the case of Jenny Hatch. It's a nationally known case. Jonathan Martinez was the lawyer who represented Jenny, and he talks about this and about the lengths that they needed to go to prove Jenny's capacity again. So it's a very costly endeavor. It can be a very long endeavor as well. Proving incapacitation is one thing, but then turning around and proving one's capacitation once this is done is another. And so it can, because of this, it can be very difficult and costly to even modify but terminate someone's guardianship. Another risk is that the power is with the court. So should something ever happen to a person's guardian, the ward, the individual underneath the guardianship, is at risk of being at the mercy of the court's decision for their life. We also see this a lot in South Carolina and beyond. And I tell families, you're not going to be here forever. Even your backup plan, they can decide that they would like to not be involved if they so wished. And there are just so many risks when you have something like this set in place. And these are things to think about before continuing the process of this not permanent, but pretty solid, unmoving process of guardianship. Another risk is that there has been evidence and continues to be evidence of increased abuse and neglect under guardianships. It is common for people under guardianships to regress in their ability to self-advocate and make decisions once their basic human rights have been stripped away. Because so often, once people initiate a guardianship over their loved one, they call all the shots, they make all the decisions. The good intention of a guardianship decades ago was that this would be a support while folks learn skills, but there's nowhere to go in those skills because the guardianship trumps all of that. The guardianship makes it to where no one can actually exercise true self-direction and true independence, because at the end of the day, the family member or whoever the guardian is going to continue making those decisions. So a lot of times we see regression as opposed to progression in skill building. And finally, guardianships are very costly. We often see guardianships costing around $5,000 to $7,000, with some in the $10,000 range. We had a mom who so far has spent $2,500, with more fees accruing to finalize. She was coming to us for help because she is nearing the end of the process of guardianship. It has not been officially set in place, but even to reverse it at that point is going to take some significant work. And she's already spent a lot of money. So it's important to explain this to parents, because a lot of the majority of the time, I would even say all the time, there are far cheaper, even free alternatives to guardianship that can be implemented before we even consider guardianship as an option. So let's talk about some alternatives to guardianship. This is not an exhaustive list. There are more. I'm talking, these are mainly some legal legislative options that have been put in place for our state, for South Carolina, and some of these are national, federal as well. But people can consider power of attorney. There's a couple different options. There's a healthcare power of attorney, and then what's called a durable power of attorney. And again, another piece of paper, but something that's a little bit more flexible. A healthcare power of attorney is what we call a living document. It can be changed, removed as needed. And then a durable power of attorney does require the assistance of an attorney, of a lawyer, but can also be more easily adjusted, reversed as needed. Representative payee is another option as well for folks who receive benefits and need some financial support. There's the Adult Healthcare Consent Act, which really just protects folks in emergency situations, and hospitals should go to their next of kin in an emergency situation where someone has been incapacitated due to their health. And so sometimes we'll have hospitals that say, no, you need guardianship in order to make these healthcare decisions. And that's not necessarily true. So we have consent acts like this, and the educational one that protect the rights of individuals who are momentarily incapacitated or even starting to move into permanent incapacitation. So we'll bring those to the awareness of families as well, who are often not aware that that exists. The Adult Students with Disabilities Educational Rights Consent Act in South Carolina, that act allows the individual to choose a representative in order to help speak on their behalf or help support with educational decisions while they're still in school once they've passed the age of 18. And then there's also the ability for students who might need maybe more of a doctor's support, a doctor's letter to help enforce that. There's room for that as well. And so that act exists to help students continue to make decisions, retain their rights, make decisions in school settings without losing all of their rights to guardianship. And just to name several others, an advance directive is an option. And oh, I'm reading this slide wrong. Sorry. An advance directive is an option, but the power of attorney is an advance directive. And it's a written instrument that names an agent to handle the affairs of the person wanting some support. It can be very narrow, it can be very broad, depending on what the support needs are and what the individual decides is best for them. It can focus solely on healthcare, or it can be more intended for financial support, which is where you see the differences between the healthcare power of attorney and the durable power of attorney. And it can take effect immediately or spring at incapacity. So it's not something that is necessarily in action all the time, but it is there as a safety net for folks. But what is required is a relationship of trust. And even getting to that point, sometimes it helps to talk with other professionals, service providers, what have you, with the individual about who they might trust and who they would want to name as these supporters. So we on our website for supported decision making have the South Carolina template for healthcare power of attorney, so that's an easily accessible resource for people. And so we often remind people that if there's a capacity to sign, then there is a capacity to revoke. So this is a living document that can be reversed, taken away as needed. And so coming into that with that perspective that any option, any alternative to guardianship should be gone, the perspective going into it should be, I would one day want to work toward this not being needed. And if that's the common goal with folks, we really work toward that. Again, that independent living philosophy. Representative payee is a person, it can be an agency, an organization, or an institution that is appointed by the Social Security Administration to manage the funds of an individual who receives benefits. This can be a relative, this can be a friend, but this can also be a facility, an organization, or even a nonprofit. They are required to keep accurate records related to the use of funds, as well as to submit a yearly report to Social Security. And then there's also things like special needs trusts and Palmetto ABLE accounts. That's the name of it in South Carolina, but ABLE accounts are in many states. And those are additional alternatives as well for managing finances, for being able to save money past the benefit allowance of assets, of funds. So briefly going over the Adult Health Care Consent Act. Like I said, this is when a person is unable to consent. Decisions about their health care can be made by the following persons in order of priority. So you have guardian first, you have the power of attorney next, and in many cases, the spouse will be next, as well as any children of the patient, the parent of the patient, then the sibling. So it goes on down the line in order of most close to the patient to be able to make decisions on their behalf. So again, guardianship is not the sole option in order to support a person in their healthcare decisions. And we really try to drive that home, that there are other options. There is another way, instead of just talking about guardianship, just referring to guardianship. Very similarly, the Adult Students with Disabilities Educational Rights Consent Act works in much the same way. So this is an excerpt from Disability Rights South Carolina, which is our protection and advocacy group. And it says that under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of '04, a student who is eligible for special education services is entitled to a free and appropriate public education between the ages of 3 and 21. At the age of 18, all parental rights under IDEA transfer to the student unless the student has been determined incompetent or incapacitated. This gives the adult student many important rights and protections under IDEA that the parents previously held. So students with disabilities can use supported decision-making by choosing an adult to support them in making their educational decisions. And then students with significant disabilities can use power of attorney. They can use a certified educational representative, which also could be the parent, or guardianship again as a last resort. So let's talk about supported decision-making. So here's one definition that I like to use, and this aligns with how I often describe supported decision-making as a lifestyle, as a practice. It is a series of relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements of more or less formality and intensity designed to assist an individual with a disability to make and communicate decisions about the individual's life. And the reason why I say it's a practice is because this is not a one-size-fits-all. This is not even, there's not even a general template for supported decision-making. This is trial and error. This is individualized. And this is about, this is a lifestyle. This is ingrained into every facet of life. And so I think that it's important for families to understand that this requires active support. And that doesn't necessarily mean support in the ways of like a personal care attendant might support, or support in the ways that a teacher might support. Sometimes support just looks like being available. Sometimes support looks like being named on a legal document to help in matters of finances or help in matters of healthcare. So it varies depending on the needs of the individual, but everything about supported decision-making really should be goal-oriented and goal-focused. And the idea is to become progressively more fluent in self-direction, which I'll talk about self-direction in a minute, and being able to live an independent, self-directed life. Okay, so here are some forms of supported decision-making, and plot twist, if you haven't already kind of come to this conclusion, every single one of us uses supported decision-making. And this can include seeking advice, input from people before buying a car or hiring a plumber, having an attorney at the closing of your new home, getting your taxes prepared by a professional. Person-centered planning is also a form of supported decision-making. Self-directed IEPs, definitely a form of supported decision-making. So I think about even my own life and ways that I have used SDM. And a lot of the ways that I've used them in a disability context related to my disability is asking friends and other professionals for recommendations for a counselor, asking my counselor how to navigate a situation where I'm questioning reality or where I'm having a really hard time turning my brain off, or which doesn't happen. So I see a lot of ways that I specifically use supported decision-making to make sure that I'm making the best decision that I can make at the time, and then navigating accordingly if that A was not maybe the best decision at the time, or B ended up being the best decision. This is just life. And so that's what I try to tell people, that is that supported decision-making is life, it's community, and it's putting that into practice. And it's going to look different with every single person. Another way to break this down is that supported decision-making is when you take the information, the facts, what's going on with whatever team of supporters there happens to be for the person. And it all gets channeled to the individual, which then gets communicated to the providers, if that happens to be the case. Whoever is being, whoever the individual is making that decision with or to, for whatever reason. That's how I break down supported decision-making. It's combining the facts, the reality of what's going on with whatever the support the individual has in place, and it's being given to the individual to make the final decision, to make the final call. So here are some benefits of SDM. It's individualized. The individual decides who offers support. They're in control. The individual retains all of their legal rights. There's no expensive attorney fees, no expensive court fees, rarely. Unless there's more, you can still be using, of course, supported decision-making, even when there's a power of attorney involved. So that's not to say that supported decision-making will never incur court fees. It depends on the level of support that's needed. But rarely is that the case. Teaches individual about decision-making and the details of their affairs. And if one strand of support breaks, then the others should serve as a safety net. This is key. So that's why a team is so important. That's why being aware of all of the community resources and options that one is eligible for is so important, because that just means that there are more options and opportunities for support out there that can create that team of support, that if one goes away or is just not there anymore for whatever reason, that there is still a safety net. There's still a group of supporters. So I've made mention of a supported decision-making agreement in the past, and if you weren't sure what I was talking about, not every state has this. Not every state, if you're like South Carolina, this isn't legally recognized. So a supported decision-making agreement doesn't have to be legally recognized to be used. Really, it's more so for the individual and the family if they want something to put on paper. A lot of times I have people that just want to put it down and want to write it down and make it official. And it helps people work through who are their options, what kinds of things might I even need support for, especially if they've never even thought about this practice before. So supported decision-making, an agreement is typically very flexible on what is covered. It can always be changed. It can always be modified. The individual can select one or multiple supporters depending on the need, and it depends on the context too. Like I try to tell people as well, the things that I go to my friends for, I'm not gonna go to a professional, a stranger that I don't know about. And the things that I go to a professional for, I may not include my friends in that. So it really depends on what the decision is. These agreements can be informal or formal. We've had folks that put agreements on file with their doctor so that the doctor knows this person likes to have this person in the room with them. This person likes to spend a little extra time in the room. And it's a form of accommodation in a way, is how I would frame that. South Carolina law, like I've said, does not specifically recognize supported decision-making agreements, but nothing in South Carolina law prohibits such an agreement, hence the use of it by people that prefer to do it that way. And so we also make sure to inform people that this form is not a substitute for legal advice. This is simply a way for people to kind of put their thoughts on paper, to kind of workshop this. It helps with planning, it helps with goal setting. And this is what a sample supported decision-making agreement might look like. So you'll see at the top, there's typical demographic information asking for name, date of birth, address, and it's asking for supporter information. So you might make one of these for each one of the supporters. So we've had people make this for each of their parents and for providers that they're close with, that they interact with a lot and ask for information. I want the supporter to help me with, there's boxes for finances, healthcare, legal matters, education. Do I want this supporter to see my private health information? Do I not want them to see that information? this is honestly very typical to a form that a healthcare professional might give to an individual when it comes to a release of information or something like that. So this is a general template, and of course can be adjusted depending on the context. So some things to consider when helping people make an agreement, asking them where and when they might want support. And so naming some potential areas for decision-making support, healthcare being a large one, finances being a large one, even relationships, education, employment, figuring out a life plan, any legal matters that they may be involved with. These are really big avenues for decision making that would ask for some support. Okay, so I'm going to share with you some resources that we've developed over the years. One of those being a stop, look, and listen tool. And even if you're in other states, I'm going to include our website at the end so you can look through these resources. Some of these resources are state specific, such as the South Carolina Healthcare Power of Attorney template. But a lot of these can be used and adopted and modified to fit whatever your needs are. So don't hesitate to kind of look through, borrow, take, use these however you deem helpful. So the Stop, Look, and Listen tool is intended to plan for independence and adult decision making. So very focused on goal setting. We're very goal oriented here. And in essence, the independent living philosophy is goal oriented. As we want progression, we look for progression to independent living. So as families, IEP teams, and support networks plan for the highest degree of independence possible, this tool is designed to assess what learning opportunities an individual has been provided to prepare for adult decision-making responsibilities. And then as well, it identifies the gaps. What are things that have been missing? And where can we start implementing those practices? It ensures access to learning opportunities because it identifies those gaps. So part one of the Stop, Look, and Listen tool is all about gathering information from the individual decision maker and at least one other adult supporter that often helps, just to help provide context or perspective, depending on the situation, depending on the person, on the opportunities provided to learn and practice adult skills in critical decision-making areas. And I'll show you what that looks like. So here's an example for healthcare. Let's see. And this is a photo of a graph. And on the left-hand side, a number of options for skills. So some of those being sign in for your appointment, have a copy of your insurance information, see your doctor on your own for part of the appointment, know your diagnoses, know your allergies, how they affect you. So there's lists of different skills. On the right-hand side, moving further right as you go along, you have a column with a green full battery depicting the column that says, I have the opportunity to learn and practice this skill a lot. So folks would go through that column and mark off the skills that are on the left-hand side that they do all the time, that they feel confident in, that they don't need help in. These are things that they do a lot. Then the next column, you'll see kind of a half full battery and it's yellow. And it says, I have had some opportunities to learn and practice this skill. And so then same thing, you'll go through looking at the options for skills, which is not an exhaustive list. These are just general skills on the left. And they'll go through and mark the ones that, yeah, I've been able to do this sometimes, but I don't get to do this a lot. Either I don't go to the doctor a lot, or my mom or dad typically do this for me. Or I've been nervous, I've been scared. Could be different reasons. So you'll mark those accordingly. The third column shows a very low battery with that's in red, and it says, I have not had opportunities to learn and practice this skill. So just as the same, you would go through those list of skills and mark the ones accordingly that you know that, okay, I've not done this before. I don't even know what this means, or I've been too nervous to do this, or I just haven't had the time or the context. It hasn't been something that's been relevant. So any reason for saying no is valid, but in order to build the skill, we would want to know that. So this is a chance. There's different ones. There's healthcare, there's one for finances, one for relationships. Those are all on our website as well. This gives folks the chance to see in front of them the things that they do really well, that they've been doing a lot, and the things that they might like to start doing, and being able to kind of form goals from the data reflected in this tool. And so that's what it's all about, is naming goals that folks want to work toward, and using their supporters however needed to support them in doing that. So then part 2 of the tool moves from just the data to about those opportunities to an actual discussion. Okay, what does it look like for us to start increasing these opportunities? One of the services we provide at our Center for Independent Living at ABLE is for folks to be able to work with an independent living specialist. And that's exactly what this specialist does, is they take the goals of the person wanting to work with us, and we support them by either connecting them to community resources, support them by actively working on disability-informed strategies to address those goals. So we do a lot with employment, we do a lot with relationship building, disability pride, empowerment, self-advocacy strategies as well. We also do a lot with adaptive parenting. I'm currently working, part of my role is working in adaptive parenting as well. And so I'm working with a number of parents with varying disabilities, and we set goals about parenting from a disability-informed perspective. And sometimes I've used this tool as a way to do that, or maybe like a modified version of this tool specifically for skills associated with parenting. But the ideal output is that you come away with goals for access to those skill building opportunities. Now, I want to stop here and mention that there are some situations where a stop, look, and listen tool isn't going to be applicable. A typical supported decision-making framework might not be applicable, relevant, or even feasible. So I want to tell you about this. I wish I had a picture to show you, but we don't have an updated picture, and I don't think we have one that would even be circulated internally. But we've worked with this, he just turned 19, this 19-year-old with significant autism, and supported decision-making looks for him, in order to avoid guardianship, looks like a protective order. So in essence, this young man and his mom came to us frustrated with the system, being told that at every point that they needed guardianship to do anything. And this mom was very worried about guardianship because she's a single parent. And if anything were to happen to her, she did not want her son to be at the mercy of the court. They didn't have any family support. She was very worried for her son. So they did not want to pursue guardianship for that reason and several other reasons as well. And this young man had previously been in a youth facility that had abused him, neglected him. That facility has now been shut down because of this issue is what was the tip of the iceberg. But they'd had many complaints against them as well. So he had just regressed in every area you could think of, and working to get our state to supply him with the resources that he was eligible for was a harder feat than it ever had to be. But the attorney that we were working with, because so many people had said guardianship is it, that's the only thing, because they deemed him incapacitated to do anything else. The attorney that we were working with, who is a excellent, amazing advocate for disabled folks, said, no, we can actually do a protective order so that there can be significant support from family without all of his rights being stripped away. So for this young man, supported decision-making looks like all of these community resources coming together to teach skills and progress him toward his level of independence, the highest level of independence that he can reach. So when I talk about these resources, I'm well aware that there are certain situations that the way that these are presented may not apply, but it can still be used. It can still be adjusted and individualized to the person, no matter what the disability is. And what we are trying to do is to help people think beyond what society has told us is the MO, the typical response, and help people realize that you can be giving people freedom away from something confining and constricting like guardianship, by just bringing alongside the right support and setting some goals for progress. So I'll move on, but I just did want to mention that there are situations where these typical resources, the way that they're presented, wouldn't work for everybody. So it is important to modify and work with professionals who are disability informed, who can help do that. I don't need to talk about scoring. It just comes with setting goals and looking at the data that's been presented from the Stop, Look, and Listen tool. So to continue on, I did want to make mention that independence is rarely all or nothing. We're not leaving anybody on an island. This is not like the goal is to eventually have no support. That's just not what life is about. And as we get older, every single person is going to need more support. It is just, if you have, if you are someone that ends up living to old age, you're going to have more support. So we don't want to push this notion that the goal is independence in the way that our minds might immediately go to. That's not how this works. Independence just looks like self-direction. So we increase our independence with a skill as we are exposed to it, and the natural consequences for doing it or not doing it. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about one of my favorite terms to talk about, especially with parents who are having trouble with the transition from more control to less control. I'm going to talk about dignity of risk in a moment. But to finish up with Stop, Look, and Listen, it's just important to connect with sources of support. Folks with disabilities may be used to others providing support in their daily lives without them even having to ask for it. So for this reason, help might be needed to define the possible roles of adult supporters, what problem solving looks like, and then how to even request that support. And that's a transition. That's a process. And for everybody, it looks different. So talking about self-direction, you might also hear the term self-determination. We prefer to say self-direction. It's a way that we feel like that term better encompasses what we're trying to say. But how do you assist someone with being able to self-direct? And we always say, choose the least restrictive means necessary for that individual to be successful. Give room, give space for failure, give space for feeling things out and navigating. Less control is almost always better than more control in many situations. Ask yourself, is this step necessary? Is there an alternative that promotes more independence? That's important for parents to ask. It's important for professionals to ask. Any provider to ask this question and to have this framework in mind. And remember that IQ is not predictive of self-direction ability. IQ tests are incredibly biased. They're rooted in racism. They're rooted in ableism. We could go on and on and on about IQ. But just as a reminder, it doesn't predict whether someone is going to be able to progress toward a higher level of independence at all. A person's self-direction status, there's evidence that shows that it predicts higher quality of life. It is positively correlated with more positive post-secondary outcomes, including employment, independent living, community inclusion, for youth that are transitioning. Okay, and just to reiterate, avoid assumptions about capacity. Try not to avoid learning opportunities just because of past failures or because of difficulty. Independence from increased responsibility can be a great incentive for learning new skills. I know that I've learned more from my failures in life than my successes. And I'm a better person and a better professional and a better mom and a better friend because of those failures and because I was given space to learn those skills. People with greater self-direction are generally healthier, more independent, more well-adjusted, and better able to recognize and resist abuse. And that's a large one because, as we said at the beginning, guardianships tend to make people regress and are they open doors for more abuse and neglect because of the nature of what they are. So opposite of this, self-direction helps people avoid and resist abuse. Let me check my time here. I want to leave a little bit for questions, so I'm going to try to move through these slides a little bit more quickly. So it's important to have conversations. Encourage your families that you work with. Encourage each other to have conversations about this concept. But anyone that you're working with, it's so important that you start as early as possible and encourage families to start as early as possible, especially if you work with families of young children. Not to be afraid to start these conversations as early as they deem necessary, even earlier than that. I would push. We have a lot of families that, especially when it comes to the transition into adulthood, a lot of families that start very close to the age of majority. And so then they're panicking and then they're trying to plan very quickly. So it's just important to go ahead and have some of these options talked about, vetted, worked through as a family before you come down to the wire. So discuss employment options, financial planning, future goals, medical decisions, all of those things. These conversations can help set the tone for what supported decision-making might start to look like in the future. And again, starting with those least restrictive measures. Instead of focusing on what a person is unable to do, pay attention to strengths. Allow an individual with a disability to experience responsibility and make mistakes instead of shielding away and shying away from supported decision-making. Lean into that risk, lean into the fear that can come with less control. And even though that might sound more like a parent-oriented bit of advice, it's for professionals as well. Even we as professionals have this general fear of not doing, I don't even know where that fear comes from, but maybe the fear of not doing as much as we possibly can, or not having as much control over a situation as possible. So there's a lot of wisdom to be gleaned for a professional working with disabled communities to be thinking about this, be thinking about what least restrictive means, to be thinking about dignity of risk. I might come back to these, but I'm going to skip past our these are our staff members now, but they were our interns and folks who worked with us as youth in our youth programs. So whether they were interns or AmeriCorps members, we have a program for folks to get paid doing some intern level work. And so now they're each staff members. And so they have their own personal experiences with supported decision-making. But I do want to talk about how we're advancing supported decision-making in South Carolina. So our funding, my funding for this grant comes from our Developmental Disabilities Council, the DDC. And so some of the goals, our state goals for this grant, include working with individuals to remove guardianships, which has not been done in our state before, to my knowledge. And so we're currently working with our protection and advocacy group, which is called Disability Rights South Carolina, to help very recently three of our state residents to remove their guardianships and conservatorships. We're also partnering with parents and families to provide that advice, that support surrounding supported decision-making and what less restrictive alternatives to guardianship looks like for them. And so I do a lot of speaking with parents and families one-on-one for that and offering that one-on-one support. We're also coming alongside legislators, attorneys, other legal professionals. So specifically the legal and political communities to support their work, as well as educate about supported decision-making. And I say specifically, even though we educate all professionals across the board, there's a targeted effort with this group in our state, or with this grant in our state, to work with the legal and political communities. But we also take every opportunity to present about supported decision-making to educational professionals, healthcare professionals, other professional groups that work with people with disabilities. And of course, we always continue to offer and provide our peer support, education, other services for consumers. So the independent living specialist team that works one-on-one with consumers to build those decision-making skills, to build self-advocacy. And we're very proud of this work because a lot of our resources and our expertise is what drives this information, as well, of course, as vetted research studies nationally. But again, like I said, we live and breathe this, and this is really important work for us. Some additional resources that I want you to take note of. This is the website that I was talking about, the scsupporteddecisionmaking.org website. And all of this information will be given to you via email. You'll get the slides from me. So don't worry about hastily trying to write things down or take a picture. You'll be given all of this. But included in these resources is a supported decision-making manual, and we have various versions depending on context. So individuals and families have one, attorneys have one, service providers, medical professionals. Now, remember, a lot of that information is going to be geared toward South Carolina residents, but there's so much information in there that is universal and able to be gleaned by anybody from any state. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Of course, we have our Stop, Look, and Listen tool series. We have videos on all of these as well, from webinars, folks sharing their personal experiences. So really encourage you to take a look through that and start adapting that to your own practice if you're not doing that already. We also have the template for what an agreement looks like. I encourage you to look at, again, your state-specific policies, things that would be unique to your state. Like I said, we have our healthcare power of attorney template up there, as well as national resources and guidelines and guidance as well. So the national resources are really good to look at. I refer to those a lot, refer parents to those a lot. So I encourage you to look through those. This is how you can stay in touch with me. Even if you're from another state, I want to hear from you, and I want to be able to connect you with people in your state. We at ABLE South Carolina are very well connected nationally, and especially with other centers for independent living. So if you have any questions or just want to be more connected with what's going on in your state, please feel free to reach out to me anyway, but especially those in South Carolina. ABLE wants to be working with your consumers. We want to be a support to you all professionally, as well as to your communities of people that you work with. We collaborate with many, many organizations. We love connection. We love collaboration. Some of my favorite meetings are our interagency meetings. It is my personal philosophy, and as well as the philosophy of our staff, that as many people that can come to the table, there's open seats, there's open invitation for people to come to the table and to learn together. In my bio, if you remember, I talked about this notion of everyone's on a different journey and a different pace as far as learning. I came into the disability rights sector later in life than I wish that I had. Started out in education and pretty quickly realized that was not for me. So my journey into learning about disability and unlearning about disability, things that I had picked up from just life, has been unique to me and also just really wonderful and life-changing. So all that to say, we want to work with you. We want to connect with you. And you can do that through our website here, able-sc.org. You can also feel free to email me at aspringgate@able-sc.org. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see ways to get in touch with us, whether through our, through our 2 offices, email, phone number, social media as well, however works best for you. And that is all that I have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions, I would love to try to answer those as best I can, or at least refer you to people that can.
Alie, thank you so much for just an incredible presentation filled with lots of wonderful information. Thank you so much. This was great.
Of course. Thank you for having me again. It was an enormous pleasure. Thank you so much.
So yeah, we're thrilled to have you here and presenting on such an important topic. And we do have a question that came up. What have you found to be some common misperceptions surrounding supportive decision making, and kind of how have you been able to, kind of try to dispel some of those misperceptions?
Yes. So just being transparent, some of my more frustrating conversations have been from families who, so well-intentioned. As a parent myself, granted I have very young children right now, I can even relate even now to a lot of the fear and the motivations behind these questions. But a lot of the feedback that we'll get initially from well-meaning parents is, oh, this won't work. This won't work for me. This won't work for my son. This won't work for my daughter. And we hear a lot about this won't work because my child has the mind of a toddler, or the mind of, a lot of ableist language surrounding coming from parents who, there are a lot of reasons for that. And so I try to gently push back where I can, but I also want them to know, and I want to empower them, that supported decision-making can work. It will work. And part of why I frame it like a lifestyle and like a practice is that this is not without a lot of effort. This is not without a lot of change. And in the long run, you are providing a healthier, supportive environment for those who are disabled, instead of confining them to a life without rights, and a life that is in seclusion and regression and dependence. So that's probably been the biggest pushback, is the thought that the fear that this is not going to work, that this doesn't apply to me. So it takes several conversations. So that's one strategy that I use, is that, we're not going to solve the world in one conversation. We're not going to completely change your perspective and your life and how you feel about your child's disability, or how that's impacted your family, or anything, in one conversation. So it takes a relationship, it takes trust. And I want to be someone that people can trust. And I want them to know that, listen, we are in your corner. We get it. Like, so many of our staff are parents, but also disabled parents. And so there's a peer-to-peer support that can be given that may not always be received in every context of the professional realm. So I hope that answers your question, but it really takes a relationship to build these bridges and help parents see how valuable this is. With other professionals, the pushback that I've gotten is mainly just due to misinformation. And once they realize the opportunities available, it's all about building that confidence to then educate people in their professional communities to say, actually, I heard that this is not the way to do things, that this actually is what the law says, or this actually is a better alternative for these families going through this. And it's that chain reaction that builds on itself, that can be slow, but so important when it comes to outreach and making sure that people are aware of the correct things. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. And I think that starts to touch on another question that we got as well in terms of um, how would you describe that role of education and advocacy, and kind of what is that role specifically that counselors should be taking, um, as it relates to promoting supportive decision making as a preferred option?
Um, yeah, I'm going to reiterate again, just the role of trust, but a way to build that trust is to be informed. So as a counselor, especially, and any professional, truly, if this is new information or newer information, be informed. Be informed about what your state is doing. Be informed about what the options are. I cannot tell you how embarrassing, maybe embarrassing is not the right word. I shouldn't be ashamed of this, but how embarrassing it was that when I first started this work, I had little to no idea what all of these things were. And so it's taken a considerable amount of talking with other people that know what they're doing, research on my own, as well as like just learning, listening to webinars from people who talk about this topic. It's just so important to be informed so that you can be a trusted place for your clients, people who are coming to you for your expertise, for information, but also so you can be a good advocate. So you can be someone who says, actually, I know this information, I've studied this information, and what you're saying is correct, but not quite fully correct. And being able to address those misconceptions, address those misunderstandings because you are informed, I think is incredibly important. That's been something that's helped my own role as an advocate, is simply knowing what I'm up against, knowing what I need to know, knowing what I don't know, in order to combat some of those societal misinformation, misconceptions.
Absolutely. So that importance of kind of educating oneself before being able to go out there and kind of spread the word and provide that education to others as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of with that, Alie, I'd be curious, how important has consultation been in that education process, both kind of the self-education and educating others? How important has it been to consult with fellow colleagues also familiar with this topic as well?
Oh my gosh. Invaluable. So valuable. So very recently I went to, I'm so happy they let me come to this conference because it was specifically geared for folks in protection and advocacy, so the legal community. But I went to this conference and was able to connect with so many people who are also advocating for less restrictive alternatives to guardianship, advocating against guardianship, and being able to connect with people who are fighting the same fight, but in a different vein, in a different way, from a different approach, with a different set of rules, expectations, the understanding of society, understanding of clientele. And that was huge for me as a person from a Center for Independent Living, being able to see and understand maybe some a peek behind the veil, if you will, into like legal strategies and ways that people are handling this topic in their own professional context, but also in their own state, and state to state, what strategies they're having to implement because of the unique makeup of their state. And I was able to even take away some strategies that I could see being relevant to our own state, to being able to address this issue. So I just think it's so important to talk with your colleagues, other professionals, particularly professionals in a different context than yours, just to give you another facet, another lens to look through. Because sometimes we can get very siloed in our professional groups, and that's why I love interagency connection so much, because of that. But even talking with our own colleagues, there's so much that I can learn from our staff who have different disabilities than I do. Learning from each other, I can't tell you enough how important that is, both professionally and personally. It's really important to do that.
And thank you, Alie. I know this is really important to us as well to be able to learn from you in this important area. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I will send out, I'll send to Daniel, Christine, the slides from today, but I'm also going to attach a survey, and it's you can edit the survey digitally, but I can't speak to exactly how accessible it is. So if you need a different version, please reach out to me. I have to use a form directly from our funders. Otherwise I would make it myself and do a little bit differently. But so all that to say, I'll send the survey out. It's completely optional, but if you would take the time to give it back, that would be amazing. But I'll send all of that to Christine and Daniel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alie. And again, we'll be sure to send that out to all of our registrants and participants for today so we can get you as much feedback as possible. Also a reminder to those in attendance to please complete the ARCA evaluation survey in the chat box in order to obtain your continuing education for today. And Alie has graciously mentioned that we'll be able to share the PowerPoint slides afterwards as well. So we'll be sure to send that as a follow-up to everybody along with Alie's survey. And of course, with that, we would just like to provide our sincerest gratitude to Alie Springgate for this wonderful and meaningful presentation on supported decision-making and other alternatives to guardianship, promoting the least restrictive measures. Alie, again, we're most grateful for you for taking the time to share your expertise and knowledge with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your webinars today. But thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you, Alie. And for those in attendance as well, we appreciate you joining us today. And of course, we'd like to invite you to our next ARCA webinar as part of our month-long June 2024 webinar series, which is also scheduled for today, Friday, June 21st from 12 p.m. Eastern Time to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, titled The Multicultural Counseling Competencies and Disability, Connecting the Dots with Intersectionality. For those who will be joining us, we'll be placing you in the Zoom waiting room until closer to the top of the hour. And please feel free to check out the ARCA website to review our month-long June 2024 webinar series program, which includes programming for next week as well. We hope you'll consider joining us. And on behalf of the American Rehabilitation Counseling Association, thank you again, Alie, and we thank each of you for joining us, and we wish everyone a wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you all so much.